Castles for the Laborers and Ball Games on the Radio for Howard Zinn, 1922 to 2010. We stood together at the top of his icy steps without a word for once, squinting at the hill below and the tumble we were about to take, heads bumping on every step till our bodies rolled into the street. He was older than the bread lines of the Great Depression. Before the war, he labored at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, even organized apprentices, but now there was ice. I outweighed him by 100 pounds. When my feet began to skid, I would land on him and hear the crunch of his surgically repaired spine. The books I held for him would fly away like doves disobeying an amateur magician. "Let's go back in the house," I said. "Show me the baseball Sandy Koufax signed to you, from one lefty to another." Instead, he picked up a blue plastic bucket of sand, the kind of pail good for building castles at Coney Island, tossed a fist of sand down onto the sun-frozen concrete, and took the first step delicately. Again and again, he would throw a handful of sand in the air like bread for pigeons, then probe with the tip of his shoe for the sandy place on the next step. Sand, then step. Sand, then step. Every time he took a step, I took a step, an apprentice shadow studying the movements of his teacher, the body. This is how I came to dance a soft shoe in size 14 boots, grinding my toes into the gritty spots he left behind on the ice. I was there. I saw him turn the tundra into the beach with a wave of his hand. Coney Island of castles for the laborers and ball games on the radio, showing the way across the ice and down the hill into the street where he spoke to me the last words of the last lesson. "You drive."
Wow. Mr. Espada, that poem gives terrific insights into your relationship with Howard. I was wondering if you could please share more about that relationship and perhaps tell us about his interest in poetry.
Well, Howard and I were close friends for years. It felt as if I always knew him. My father was actually friends with Howard's brother, Jesse Zinn. They were organizers together in Brooklyn in the 1960s. Howard was a great teacher. He was one of my great teachers, despite the fact that I never took a single class with him. He was, as you pointed out, Dave, a few minutes ago, a very funny guy. And his humor comes across in that poem, especially the punchline at the end. We were acting out metaphors. Sometimes people do that. We were acting out metaphors. And all this really happened, by the way. We were on our way to speak together at a rally in Cambridge against the bombing of Gaza. And I remember it very well. It's the last day I spent with Howard. His interest in poetry was remarkable. He was interested in everything. First of all, I should say that Howard had the soul of a poet. He had the craft of a poet. Not only, I'm not speaking as a writer as much as a performer. Now, you were talking about performance. I used to love to watch Howard backstage from the wings. So I could see him from behind the podium as he moved his hands as he spoke. You may have noticed Howard doing that in the clip. You may have noticed me doing that just now. It's not a coincidence. But as far as poetry is concerned, poetry of the radical tradition in particular, Howard was, if you pardon the pun, very well versed. There was an obscure article he published called Rise Like Lions, Writers and Resistance in the Newsletter of Poets Against War in Sam Hamill's organization. And there he quoted poets ranging from Edna St. Vincent Millay and her poem Conscience Subjector to Percy Bysshe Shelley and The Mask of Anarchy. That was, I think, his favorite single poem, Rise Like Lions After Slumber in Unvanquishable Number. That was Howard.
I love that description. Thank you for sharing that. And in your book, Zapata's Disciple, you know, it was on the list of titles banned in Tucson in 2012 as part of the attack on the Mexican American Studies program outlawed by the state of Arizona. And in the introduction to a new edition, you refer to a bomb threat you received at a reading in Tucson and say of the book ban, you said this, quote, "In the end, this is just another bomb threat. All they have done is force us to evacuate the building. We will gather ourselves in the dark and keep reading to each other in whatever light we can find." So what would you say about the increased numbers of cities and states banning books today?
I would say that we must be ever vigilant because censorship works. I can say that from personal experience. Books are like people. A book has a lifespan. Books die too. And for every book like Howard's People's History, 4 million copies sold and counting, a book that has transcended every attempt to censor it, there are hundreds that die. And so we have to shake ourselves from the complacency we sometimes feel in this country when it comes to issues of censorship and book banning, the notion of our freedoms is something that sometimes causes us to put down our weapons. We must pick up our weapons to do battle against censorship. It is real. It is happening now. And the sad fact is, most of the time, we will not know when books have been censored. The only difference between this historical moment and most historical moments when it comes to censorship is the brazenness of it. People are being very open about censorship to the point where they're now passing laws that legislate censorship. Usually we don't have the privilege of knowing what has been banned, and we have to find out the hard way. That's how I found out my book had been banned, and my book died. Zapata's Disciple died. It went out of print. And if it wasn't for the fact that it was ultimately reprinted in a new edition from Northeastern University Press, nobody would be able to read it today.
Thank you. That's a powerful note.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was incredibly moving, and it rang incredibly true.